Our final story of tonight is more news on the federal liberal budget. I think the video that we did, or the clip of us talking about the federal budget last week, did fairly well, above average. So clearly, this is something that people want to hear more about. So here's another story about the liberal budget. If you guys watched the last video, I'm talking to our audience members now. If you guys watched our last video, you guys would know that we, the Zillennial Crew, are not big fans, let's just say, of this new liberal budget. And it appears that it's not uncalled for, because there are a lot of people that apparently really dislike this new liberal budget. One of such group is doctors. So let me just read you part of this article that I found, where doctors, the Medical Association, the Canadian Medical Association, has asked the Liberal government to reconsider the capital gains tax change. For those of you who don't remember what that was, basically there's a capital inclusion rate. There's a capital gains inclusion rate, which is the percentage of your capital gains that gets added to your income tax. So that's how we do capital gains in Canada, is that, let's say if you make $100,000 in capital gains, and you made another $100,000 at your job as your salary. Then the previous rules, if you make 100K in capital gains, the capital inclusion rate is 50%, meaning that 50K of that 100K will get added to your taxable income. So it would be as if you made 50K more at your job. So in total, you would be taxed that year as if you made 150K of income at your job. But what the Liberals are proposing is that if you have capital gains above 250K, the portion that is above 250K will be included at 2/3. So it'll be 66.66% added to your taxable income. It doesn't sound like it affects a lot of people, right? Because 250K, who has that? But this is what the Liberals are saying, by the way. They're saying that, oh, it's not going to affect that many people. It's fine. It's only going to affect wealthy people. But the issue is that this applies to corporations as well, right? And it also applies to any type of second house. So it doesn't apply to your principal residence, but if you have a second house, if you have a rental property, then chances are, like, given how crazy housing prices are here in Canada, if you bought the house, if you bought your rental property just a few years ago, you've probably made more than 250K in capital gains. So the point is that this affects more people than what the Liberal government would lead you to believe. And this is what the doctors are saying as well. So let me just read you part of the article. So the increase in the so-called inclusion rate would apply to capital gains above 250K for individuals, and all capital gains realized by corporations. So we have seen this portrayed by the government as tax fairness for every generation, but realistically, there are certain members of the population that are going to be more impacted. So this is like, I think this was said by one of the experts that they interviewed. Basically the crux of the issue is that a lot of doctors operate as corporations, as small businesses. When they make income, a lot of the income stays in the corporation, and the corporation can invest the income into, just stocks or other investments. It affects the doctors a lot, because just because of the particular model of like business that doctors tend to operate in. Again, this article says that the expert that they interviewed says that they want to push back on the messaging that physicians are highly paid, given their extensive years of their professional training and the fact that they graduate with substantial debt, right? So this is another factor that we have to keep in mind, that this new policy that the Liberal government is trying to push through, it doesn't make an exception for doctors, right? And then the messaging is that, doctors, they make a lot, but doctors are pushing back, saying that, hey, like, yes, we do make a lot higher than average, but it also comes with extensive years of debt, of schooling, and it's also a lot of responsibilities, right? Because we're talking about medical stuff. So if you mess up, then people die, and this is like a very serious kind of like this is a very high amount of responsibility of burden that is on the shoulders of these physicians, and it seems like the liberal government is making life a lot more difficult, right? And just to wrap it up, just kind of my own pushback to it. So uh, I'm not sure if you guys know this, but I was chatting with the leader of what's called the Future Party of Canada. Is this guy who started this new political party? Basically, his message is that hey, like the liberals suck, but the conservatives suck too, because like we're stuck in a like a American style two-party system because the NDP isn't really going to win an election anytime soon. So we're de facto a two-party system and both options suck. Like this person basically, he was like, I'm going to start a new party called the Future Party of Canada. And I think that that was a really interesting idea. So I messaged him and he asked me like, hey, like if you want to submit ideas on how to fix Canada or the future or how to, just move forward in like for the country, be sure to submit your idea. So I did. I made this like whole like 12-point plan. Maybe one day we'll go through it line by line, but we don't have time for that today. But I did just pull out an excerpt from my plan that I submitted to the Future Party. And this was point number 9. And this is in contrast to what the Liberal government is doing, because what I proposed was actually to cut the capital gains tax. And specifically to cut the capital gains tax, but only for investments into Canadian companies and Canadian bonds and stocks. So this is what I had to say. Okay, so Canadian companies often get overshadowed by American companies. I'm sure people here would know, right? Like we as investors, I think the vast majority of our money is in American companies, right? So Canadian companies often get overshadowed by American companies. So the capital flies out of Canada into the hands of the American economy. So to fix that, for those who invest in the stock market, the typical Canadian investor most likely owns many American stocks. This causes capital outflows from Canada to the US. Again, I just mentioned that. The government can incentivize Canadians to keep more of their money in the Canadian economy by giving a capital gains tax break for those who are willing to make their money work in companies right here at home. So this is my idea, 50% capital gains tax cut. So, for example, let's say if you invest in, I don't know, Loblaws, even though people hate Loblaws, but it's a Canadian company, right? If you decide to put your money into Loblaws instead of Walmart, then your capital gains will get taxed at an inclusion rate of 25% as opposed to 50%. If you decide to put your money in Walmart anyways, then you don't get the tax break and you still pay the 50% capital gains inclusion. So this is my idea, and I think that we should really do something like this. But yeah, what I found for the what I saw in the budget, in the Liberal budget, is kind of going in the opposite direction of this, and this is what I really don't like. But I've said a lot. Let me toss the question back to you guys. What do you guys think about the criticism that the doctors have towards the Liberal budget? What do you think of my idea of implementing the capital gains tax cut for Canadian company investments? And what do you think about just anything else about the budget in general or how to fix Canada? Just leaving it open.
Yeah, so with regards to your question with the doctors, right? So the doctors, a lot of them will presumably be operating as a company, I'm guessing, if they're like a practice. And as a result, they will be being more heavily taxed because of their the fact that they're basically considered a company. So I'm guessing that's probably why the main issue is coming from in that regard. And I think that's a pretty fair criticism. Oh, are you going to say something?
Yeah. So the issue, I think the crux of the issue is that not only are they operating as a company, it's like they're whenever they make money, that money they tend to invest it in things right? So it's different than like income, where like if it's different than just having the corporate income by itself, because like you have to pay tax on corporate income as well, but it's like they pay the corporate income and then they invest the money, and then now you're jacking up the capital. They make capital gains on their investments, and now the government's jacking up their capital gains as well, right? So it's kind of like a double whammy, where it's like they still made income, and they still pay taxes on that, but then like
Mhm.
they're kind of hitting them again with the capital gains when they like take the money that they've already paid the income tax, the corporate income tax on, and then they invest it into stuff that goes up, and then they have to pay the capital gains, right? So it's kind of
Yeah.
like a double whammy like that. So that's the issue.
Yeah, and to get into that, I think one of the big problems with doing something that would affect doctors in particular is that we already have a bit of a doctor crisis, and the doctors have a very easy avenue to go if Canada doesn't work with them, right? Like they can easily, or more easily, transition to the states, and that's already where a lot of our doctors are heading to. And if you want to keep the doctors around, you're going to have to do something to ensure that they are around. And raising their taxes is not gonna help them in that regard, and it's not going to incentivize them to stick around. And I found your idea of having people invest capital in Canadian stuff as like an interesting idea, because I think in a lot of regards, a lot of people would invest more heavily in Canadian companies, but I think that there still would be a significant amount of people who would invest in American companies, just because Canadian companies have a tendency to be pretty mediocre in terms of their performance compared to American ones. And so, in that regard, I could see people investing more in Canadian companies, and then in order to get the tax break, and then that being something that encourages them. The only thing with that is that who is doing most of that investing, right? Like if I because obviously we are investors here, but I don't think the average Canadian is necessarily investing the way that we do. So would that benefit most of the Canadians, or would that just benefit whoever's managing the portfolios to determine what stocks they want to pick, and in the end result in maybe a worse performance because of the fact that they're investing in Canadian stocks for the tax break, but then the Canadian stocks underperform the American stocks. So, and then the company can, and then presumably a company or a bank or whatever could pass that down to their Canadian clientele, who are then now paying more money. And just because, and as a rule of thumb, reducing taxes on companies very rarely results in the companies passing that tax savings down on you, right? Like usually it's a scenario where they may not raise prices as quickly as they would have before, but they typically aren't gifting you the money back. So like and I don't want to necessarily get into like the carbon tax or anything right now, but like for example, if like we did axe the tax, don't expect Loblaws to cut its prices because we've axed the tax, right? None of these, like the companies aren't going to pass it back to us. So it's more of like a long-term growth perspective, that if we manage this, if we manage the taxes well, hopefully we can reduce the amount of flight from Canada to other countries, particularly the US. And I think raising the taxes is risky in this climate where the US is recovering rapidly compared to Canada, and Canada is kind of stagnating. Okay, if I'm in the scenario where I may I'm either in Canada or the US, and Canada has become increasingly risky because it's stagnating, the country's not doing as well, or I can go to the US where things are regaining speed. I think a lot of stuff will move to the states, and I think that's a big risk that the liberals are taking with this. That being said, you know, I do understand that we do need to tax in order to have some of the have the amenities that we enjoy here. I just think that this is part of a larger scheme of a budget that I don't think makes a ton of sense to me. I think that's kind of what it comes to too.
Yeah, before I pass it off to you, Dom, I just so let me just kind of maybe explain like my thought process behind, like, for example, like the 50% capital gains tax cut for Canadian companies, right? So yeah, I agree with what you said, Tristan. It's like you're not going to see an immediate effect, right? It's not like we implement this tax cut and then prices go down immediately. Like that's probably not going to happen. But I think what I'm concerned about is just how do we keep more money like in Canada, right? Because like let's say you don't get it in terms of like you don't get the benefit in terms of price cuts because the companies now have to pay less taxes, but they don't want to like cut their price, right? But what they might do is hire more people now that they have more money, so you get more jobs, right? So that's also a form of like helping out the economy. And like yes, maybe rich people get richer, but we got to keep in mind like one person's spend is another person's income, right? So spending, once you get that money velocity going, I think that's going to be eventually the money will spread out, right? Like if the money is going to make its way throughout the entire economy, and again, none of this is going to be immediate, but I think that the like long term, you're going to see like positive benefits to reducing taxes for businesses, right? And if you don't want to cut taxes for big corporations, then small business, start with the small businesses, right? What we talked about for like the doctors, for example, right? Those are small businesses. Maybe we can give them a tax cut, and yeah, like what the expert on the article said, like, hey, like right now there's no exception if you're a doctor. Maybe we should make an exception for doctors where they don't have to have their capital gains tax hiked because they're considered a small business, right? So yeah, basically, like, you guys ever seen that like that South Park episode? It's like Canada's at like the United Nations or something, and like people are asking like Canada, what does Canada want? Like, what does Canada want the rest of the world to help them do? And then the guy's like, you know what Canada needs? More money. And everyone's like, what do you mean more money? Where's the extra money gonna come from? Like more money from where? And then the guy's like, I don't know, just more money. Canada just needs more money. Right? Like that's what I'm trying to figure out, right? I'm trying to figure out how to get us more money. Like that's just the crux of the issue. Like how does Canada get more money? And one thing that we can do is incentivize like money to stop outflowing to other countries like the US, who has already a stronger economy than us. So yeah, basically that's my thoughts. But let me pass it to you, Dom.
Okay. So I was taking a look at the article here, and I feel like in itself, it's already really tough for a lot of doctors and people who are trying to pursue like becoming a doctor. And like by doing like these complicated actions, I feel like it's like incentivizing less for people to want to be doctors. It's making it even more complicated, and it'll increase like the shortage, which is not really good in the long term. And like the current doctors right now have more of an incentive to want to go elsewhere, which is going to even like shorten the amount of doctors that we have here. So is this really the play? Like I don't necessarily think so, because um yeah, like the requirements of doc being a doctor is extremely tough, and limiting it and making it even like less incentive is just going to be worse in the long term. So I don't think this might necessarily be the play for that. And in terms of your like like tax break or like just keeping the money in Canada, I think that's a really cool idea. To be honest, I don't know how you thought of that in the first place. It was quite clever. And for that, I'm pretty towards it, just because I'll be honest, like I'm in VFE, right? I mean, yeah, I can buy it like with Canadian dollars, but that is like the S&P 500, right? Of like the United States companies. So I'm like guilty as charged. And if there was a way to like put my money into the Canadian market, and then inevitably with like your tax like idea, it becomes a lot more efficient for me to do that, then I would do it too, right? I would
Yeah,
have to.
I mean, there's plenty of Canadian ETFs, right? But like you don't want to put money in them because it just chronically underperforms the S&P 500, right? So if we can't beat like the American indices on like performance, then we got to artificially kind of incentivize that performance to be more balanced, right? And how do we do that? Well, tax policy is one way to do it, right? I'm not saying that that's the only way to do it, but I think like if you even out the playing field a little by cutting taxes on Canadian investments, then you can make up for a lot of the underperformance just by charging less taxes on it in the first place, right? So yeah. Sorry, I cut you off, Dom.
No, it's cool. Yeah, I completely agree. But to like Tristan's end, it probably wouldn't be instant. It would take like a little while, much as like a lot of different things. But this too shall pass. I'm sure it'll fix itself. I had the chance to check out the Future Party, and I was just looking at their website and stuff. And this guy seems pretty young. He's like, let's change like the whole political system and fire memes. And like I thought that was pretty funny. So if you guys have a chance, there's a website for the Future Party. Just check it out if you can. As it's not a sponsored ad by the Future Party, by the way. But yeah, I had to check it out and see what it was all about. And yeah, pretty neat. Seems cool.
Yeah, I'm not 100% certain if I have too much more to add. I think there's a lot of schools of thoughts with regards to whether reducing taxes will or won't have a positive effect on like business coming back to a country, for instance, and if that money will even stay even if you lower the taxes. But I think Canada, we do need to do something because we're obviously lagging a lot of other countries. So I think it's definitely a difficult situation that we found ourselves in.